Welcome back. We now have an enemy that will patrol between 2 points and wait in between patrolling. But this is an enemy. The enemy is designed to be hostile towards the player. So we need to figure out how we can have the enemy aggro the player. In other words, when do we decide when the enemy becomes hostile? Well, we can achieve this by creating an overlap volume for the enemy. An overlap sphere should do the trick. As soon as the character gets close enough to the enemy, then we can decide that the enemy becomes hostile. In games, when an enemy becomes hostile, we say the enemy is aggroed. So let's go ahead and open up our project in Visual Studio. Let's go into enemy.h and add a couple of private variables. So right here at the bottom of the private section, I'm going to add a sphere component. So let's declare a uSphere component. This will be a pointer, and I'm going to call this Agro Sphere, since this will be the sphere that will aggro the character once we overlap with it. Now we need to forward declare this, since we don't want to have to include the sphere component header. Now I'm going to give this a U property. Now let's make this edit anywhere. Blueprint read write. Category, combat, and meta allow private access equals true. Now I'm going to give this a comment and say overlap sphere for when the enemy becomes hostile. And I'm seeing an extra S here. I don't want that extra S. I just want Agro Sphere. Now, when the character enters the Agro Sphere, we become hostile. So to become hostile, we're going to need an overlap event, and we're going to need some functions to bind to the overlap event. Let's go ahead and create an Agro Sphere begin overlap function so that we can do something once the character overlaps with the Agro Sphere. I'm going to go all the way up to the protected functions. I'm going to create a void function called Agro Sphere Overlap. Now we need a particular set of input parameters here if we want to bind this function to an onComponent begin overlap event. Now we do this in the item class. Let's go over to item.h and scroll down, and we'll find a function called onSphereOverlap. Here are all of the input parameters we need. So let's copy those and go back over to enemy.h and paste those in as our input parameters for Agro Sphere Overlap. And we can add a semicolon to that, and we now have an overlap function. And I'm going to add a comment to this and say called when something overlaps with the Agro Sphere. Now, another important detail is this has to be a U function. If it's not marked as U function, it will not work with the overlap event. Let's go ahead and create a function body for this. Now we have a function, and this function needs to be bound to an overlap event for our Agro Sphere. So let's take care of that. Let's go to enemy.cpp, and first we need to actually construct this sphere in the constructor. So here in the constructor, we're going to say Agro Sphere equals create default subobject, and this will be a uSphere component, and we can give this a text macro with a name, and we're going to call this Agro Sphere. Now, in order to use the uSphere component type, we need to include that. We include this in item.cpp. At the top, we see components/sphere-component.h. We're going to copy that and use that in enemy.cpp. So I'm going to paste that right here at the top. So now we have our Agro Sphere, and I'm going to attach the Agro Sphere to the root component. So we're going to say Agro Sphere setup attachment get root component. So we now have an Agro Sphere. We can comment this if we like and say create the Agro Sphere, And now since we have an Agro Sphere, we're ready to bind a callback function to onComponentBeginOverlap for this sphere. So here in begin play, just under the super call to begin play, I'm going to say Agro Sphere onComponentBeginOverlap dot add dynamic. Now for add dynamic, we're going to pass in this followed by our callback function with the address of operator, and it's going to be a enemy Agro Sphere overlap. And I'll go ahead and put both of these input parameters on their own lines. Now we have a function callback for the Agro Sphere onComponentBeginOverlap. So what exactly are we going to do here? Well, let's go back into the editor and take a look at our Blackboard. Here in the Blackboard, we have our keys, and I'd like to add a key for a target actor for the enemy to chase. So let's add a new key. So we can click New Key and choose Object and call this Target. So now we have a key of object type called Target. This can be our target to chase when the enemy is aggroed. Let's save that, and back in C++, we can define what happens in Agro Sphere overlap. Let's go to that function. Now here in Agro Sphere overlap, what we want to do is see if the overlapped actor is a shooter character. So I'm going to say auto character equals cast to a shooter character, and we're going to cast other actor. Now we need to include the shooter character header, so let's go up to the top and include shooter character.h. Now this is defined. So once we've cast to shooter character, we can check to make sure that's valid. Now before we do this, it's a good idea to check to make sure other actor is not null. So if other actor is null pointer, we can return. Now once we've cast, we can check to see if that cast was successful. So if character. Now we know that a character has overlapped with our Agro Sphere. And this is where we want to set our target Blackboard key. So we can do this similarly to how we set our patrol point Blackboard keys. We can get our enemy controller. We can get the Blackboard using getBlackboardComponent. And we can use a function on the Blackboard component called setValueAsObject. When we set the value of our vector keys, we called setValueAsVector. This time, we're setting a value as object. Now we're going to use a text macro, and we need to use our key name, which is target. And after that, we simply need to pass the value. We're going to simply pass character. And let's get these input parameters on their own lines here. And let's comment this and say, set the value of the target Blackboard key. All right, let's go ahead and compile this. Okay, we're back here in the editor. I'm going to open enemy BP and take our Agro Sphere, and let's scale this up a bit. Here's our sphere radius. I'm going to bring it up to perhaps a value of, say, 400. Let's see how that works. We'll compile and save that. And I'm going to take our enemy Blackboard and undock it here. Now, we can use the behavior tree or the Blackboard. Either way, we can see our keys here and see their values at runtime. So let's go ahead and hit play. And here's our target key. It's set to none. Now, if I go ahead and overlap with the Agro Sphere by running up to the enemy, we'll see that it's set now to shooter character BP C0. That's our shooter character. So we know that our overlap event is working, and we're successfully setting that target key value. Now currently we're not doing anything with that key. If we go back to our behavior tree, we don't actually use that key. So in the next video, we're going to learn how we can use that key so that our enemy will chase after the target, which is going to be the shooter character, rather than moving to a plain patrol point. So we'll take care of doing that in the next video. I'll see you soon.